drop, and as usual, you're in for a fascinating program. Tonight, I'm delighted to have a gentleman who's been on the program in the past, and he's working on some new things right now, so I want to say welcome back to Dr. Patrick Graham.
Thank you for having me, brother.
I'm delighted, and I want to reconnect with you again because of an article you did, an op-ed, dealing with an issue that a lot of people don't want to talk about, man. And so we're titling this program, Falsely Accused Black Men. Now, your article appeared in, was it Rollout magazine?
Rolling Out, it
Rolling
appeared
Out.
in the Dallas Inquirer. Heart and Soul magazine, actually it appeared in 18 publications.
18, this is nationwide?
Across the nation.
Okay, and I understand that, you know, I got it because of Facebook, but since we have a little history, I was really intrigued that you took you had the audacity to deal with something that a lot of people don't want to deal with, and that is holding people accountable, at least raising the question to hold people accountable who falsely accuse, particularly black men. Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, one of the issues is that statistics show now that upwards of 15.4% of cases in our criminal justice system are at times done under false pretense. On the lower end, that's 6%. So even if 10%.
One is too many.
Right? Yeah. One is too many, but 10%, you're talking nationwide. Yeah. That's a lot of individuals. But I think what's most disturbing about it is the equity issue of it all, is that 47% of all false accusation cases are against black men. And black men only account for less than 7% of the population.
Okay. So why would you say this black men getting falsely accused? As we know, I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but just to expound on why black men falsely accused. I mean, we got the Karens, we got the, you know, he looked at me the wrong way, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, it's historical, obviously. That's one thing. So black men have always been expendable in many regards within our criminal justice systems. And so we've known that. And this is not just false accusations from white individuals. It's black on black as well. And so one of the issues that we have to deal with is some of that historical prejudice that you find in our justice system, but also the present, because that 47% is not in the past. That's today. And
we see that happening in terms of cases where it could even be in a domestic relationship. You know, someone could be accused of doing something, but then they have to go through the whole court system, falsely arrested. They're taken from their job, taken from their home. It can be weeks, months, maybe years later to find out that this person wasn't even present on the scene.
Well, you find a lot of these cases, too, that oftentimes the person who's falsely accusing is actually the perpetrator of the crime itself. Meaning by falsely accusing individuals, right, that what you're doing is actually committing a crime, but it's one that we're not making people pay for. And it's not just individuals who are doing it, but if I look at even some of our prosecutors, police,
judges, maybe not
judges sometimes who don't correctly administer issues within their court, you start to find more and more of these cases are actually avoidable. And what you're also finding is that sometimes they're very intentional.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the program about what recourse can the person who's falsely accused, what can they take. Let's put a little historical significance on what we're going to be talking about. Emmett Till, you know, how someone falsely accused him. Tell us a little about who Emmett Till was and why that particular case is so important about what we're talking about today.
Well, obviously, you know, Emmett Till, very historic case, accused of whistling at a white woman during the 50s.
In Mississippi.
In Mississippi. He was from Chicago and visiting family. And in the middle of the night is taken by authorities, right? And that type of system at the time allowed for that to happen in a very insidious way. What I do see today, though, is that oftentimes there's evidence that shows us before the arrest that this person is not the individual. But because we believe so much in quote-unquote victims' rights, that at times we ignore evidence and simply say, just let them prove themselves.
So it's like guilty until proven innocent.
Guilty until proven innocent. And that is becoming more and more the case in states with certain laws that allow even individuals, and sometimes under false pretenses, to go before a magistrate, put their hand on a Bible, and even tonight, you in this state could do that with little to no evidence and have someone arrested.
And I know someone, particularly where this has been their nightmare. They said their twilight zone. I want to add to this discussion the players behind the scene. You know, you mentioned the prosecutors. You know, maybe even like you said, police officers. You know, the Ahmaud Arbery case. You know, where there was an entire community who apparently knew what happened to him. Ahmaud Arbery is a young brother who was jogging in Brunswick, Georgia, and was murdered. It was like 2 months before that case saw the light of day, before it became a public issue. Likewise with Breonna Taylor, you know, that got a lot of exposure, but there were people who were there who were sworn to uphold the law, quote unquote, but they all agreed to lie. And so you get the young man, Kenneth, I forget his name, who's now having to clear his name, saying that he was not a drug dealer, you know. So you get, throughout these cases, people are having to spend a lot of time and money trying to prove, no, I'm innocent. So talk about the people, what type of punishment, for lack of a better word, for those people who knew something and didn't speak up, didn't tell the truth, who withheld information?
Well, first of all, a lot of our system is very incestuous, meaning they're very connected. And what they do is they try to protect the system itself, even when it's wrong. So in this case, if you look at the Ahmaud Arbery case, it was clear that you had someone who was a former law enforcement, who was actually connected to the current law enforcement.
Because he knew people.
Right? Knew people. And so this is why it took so long for this to come out. And so one of the things that we have to understand is that when you not only falsely accuse, but you also hide evidence, manipulate evidence, change evidence, so that you can continue to prosecute and persecute the falsely accused, you're actually breaking the law. Here's the problem. We are not making those people pay for breaking
That's
the
why your
law.
article was so important.
That's exactly why. When you think about the exonerated five,
So-called...
right, the Central Park Five.
Thank you.
Right? But I'll never use that to describe them because they are the exonerated five.
Yes.
Right? But they should have never been prosecuted five. You think about them, and you think about those who falsified testimony, those who coerced, right, them in the interrogation rooms, etc. My real question is this. Forget about the civil lawsuits. Forget about the money paid out to them. My question is this. Why are none of those individuals, either from the prosecution, from those who were in law enforcement at the time, etc., why are none of them in jail?
Very good question. Very good question. And I think Ava DuVernay did the movie When They See Us, which dealt with that very issue. And you would think that as a result of the media exposure that film got, I think it was on Netflix.
It is.
You know, that more people would want to know the answer to that question. But still, it's like crickets. It's silence. You know, it's a valid question.
It's some of the immunities that's provided to some of these individuals within our court systems and within our legal and criminal systems that's allowing this to occur. I'll give you a perfect example here in Charlotte. There was a gentleman who literally, a tape showed not only was he attacked in his own home, right?
Tape as in videotape.
Audio tape.
Audio tape.
Not only was he attacked in his own home, but also was made to actually suffer through 30 minutes of straight bickering, assault, while he had a child in his hand. He threatens to call the police. The individual who's assaulting him, she goes out, calls the police, swears on the magistrate.
They come.
Has him arrested, and then he goes through court, mugshots, everything. When they find out and discover that testimony both in her domestic violence hearing as well as in court, in criminal court, that now this evidence shows that she was not telling the truth, that she actually started taping before she came in, that she actually was hitting this man, that there is a child in his hand. My question is this.
What happens to her?
What happens to her? You've already dragged this man through hell. What happens to her?
So what did happen to her?
Nothing.
Oh.
That's the point.
That's the point.
The point is that it was okay to do that to this man. That's right here in our Charlotte Mecklenburg courts.
Charlotte is in Mecklenburg County, which is adjacent to Concord, which is, or Cabarrus County, which is the city of Concord. Before I get to Ronnie Long, tell me a little about Liddell Lee. What do you think about Liddell Lee in his case? That's one of the gentlemen you mentioned in the article.
Oh, talking about in Arkansas.
Yes.
So here you have a gentleman who is falsely accused of rape, murder, right? There's DNA evidence that shows that he's not the perpetrator, shows that he wasn't even there. And the governor then decides not to actually give him exoneration, but actually lets them execute this man. And so here we are 4 years later.
Can't bring him back.
Can't bring him back. And they are still not trying to give him the acquittal. And I'm going to tell you the reason I believe it's so. States are starting to realize, because of the enormous number of false accusation cases now being revealed, that they will become financially responsible. And so they are now trying all kind of attempts to either get themselves from being responsible or to limit the amount of responsibility, particularly financially, they have to pay out to victims of false accusation.
So they see the handwriting on the wall, the states.
They've already seen this, and this is why they've enacted these laws. I said, why would you have so many states, even like North Carolina, start to implement these rules that limits their liability in these cases if you're not afraid of something?
Yeah. What did you know and when did you know it?
That's right.
Ronnie Long, he got a lot of attention in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, let's say maybe 4 months ago, 6 months ago. Tell us a little bit about his case. And we had hoped to kind of have him join us during this interview, but we couldn't quite make that happen.
So Ronnie, as you know, in the 70s was actually falsely accused of a rape. Everything in the evidence demonstrated he could not be the individual. One, they were looking for a quote-unquote fair-skinned or light-skinned black male. Two, described him at a certain height. But worst of all, there was already fibers and other evidence, DNA evidence, there on the scene that clearly demonstrates that he was not the one. Instead, they ramrodded and pushed this through. And now we know today, obviously he was exonerated a couple of years back, 44 years he served. Now guess how much the state decided that they owed this gentleman for 44 years.
From a monetary standpoint.
From a monetary
no
standpoint.
money is...
No money can do it. $750,000 because they put a cap on the amount of money they will be responsible for in false accusation cases. Why are you doing that?
And so
why do we allow it?
Yeah. So who would be responsible for changing the quote unquote laws to where there is no cap? You know, there's no amount of money that will even make a person, I can't find the words for it. You know, you can't give that back. You can't compensate someone for that.
What I believe is that if there's going to be any cap, it has to be something reasonable, and I think we need to have a commission look into this issue itself because it's actually more pervasive now than we want to admit. Two, I really believe that there should be federal legislation, and there are some people who are working with me and some others to look at petitions for federal legislation to help protect victims of false accusation and actually punish people who falsely accuse or who aid and abet false accusers. So that goes to anyone
it goes
from
to prosecutors, police officers,
whoever is engaged and knows. And I mean, that's the thing too. A lot of times this is done through sloppy paperwork. The case I gave you in Charlotte, what was interesting about it is that the police officer literally had the actual tape in possession. He just never listened to it.
So there's the phrase during I'm of a certain age where the whole Watergate hearings where they say, well, what did they know and when did they know it? Right. So to your point that if someone is privy to some information and sits on it, then from what I understand you're saying, that person should be held accountable.
They should be held accountable because there's a gross negligence there.
Of not reporting it.
Of not actually reporting it or not doing the investigative work you should do. Same thing with some judges in these cases, with some of the sentences, just not being aware of the law themselves. So this is where we're going to have to make some major changes. And the problem is that black men are not very empathetic victims historically in our society. So we think it's okay
He must have done
to
something
allow
wrong,
this
huh?
to go on. That's right. I remember watching some responses to some false accusation cases, even the one here in Charlotte, on social media, and remember saying that we look at this with people who are making commentary without any knowledge of what happened. We're going to have to start really creating some space that allows people also to pay the piper when you actually help in false accusation cases.
I like that idea. So what makes it so personal for you?
What makes it so personal for me is not only my own experience, but actually watching all these individuals. Understand, I've been a civil rights advocate for some time. My career started as the CEO of the Martin Luther King Center in New York. So civil rights has always been on my radar and my trajectory of my career. But when I look at some of the gross negligence, and I've also looked at how statistically overrepresented black men are in these cases and how fast they've actually grown, I can't sit and with that type of knowledge, watch it and not do anything. And one of the reasons that so many people picked up on this article and so many publications where they were shocked by the data, not shocked that it happens, but shocked by the data
How
itself.
much information was there?
How much information was there. And you'll notice in not one of those articles that were published in 17, 18 publications across the country, no one challenged me on it because I actually gave them the resources. I said, you go look for yourself, and you've noticed I have not had a peep. I've had only support for them, but no one's actually tried to challenge me on it.
Have you been in contact with anybody on the level of the National Black Caucus or some high-powered senator who says, they can even say that, well, I didn't know, but have you been able to make contact with someone who says, this is blatant, miscarriages of justice?
So
Just anyone?
Been very involved in writing petitions with the Innocence Project
Okay.
and some others.
Is that
What you
Barry Shack them, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
But what you'll see going forward, though, from myself as well as some others, is not just federal, but even some state proposals for legislation to deal with the issue. Because if we don't call attention to this actual issue, it will just continue, and it will continue to grow. And
because it's been going on so long. Again, we talk about Emmett Till.
Right.
Yeah.
But see, we look at these as singular cases.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about close to 15.4% of cases, that's very systemic.
Yes.
But when you talk about black men who only represent less than 7% of our population, accounting for almost 50% of those cases, now you're not even just talking about systemic, you're talking about systemic racism itself.
Absolutely. And people want to run away from that. They don't want to talk about systemic racism, racism, white supremacy.
And particularly when it comes to black men, we're just not, if you look at a lot of the equity conversations, we're rarely mentioned in those conversations. And to me, that's problematic. We have never really fully benefited from this patriarchal system. It's not designed for black men. And so there's a racialized gender component to black men, our whole intersectionality that we don't talk about in the public space at all. We talk about it somewhat with black women, but we don't talk about it as much with black men, again, because we're looked at in the form of a deficit.
Yeah. So how can media help? How can media be more of an advocate for what you're doing? And I raised that question because I wanted to also mention the movie Just Mercy. Bryant Stevenson out of Montgomery, I think it's the Equal Justice Initiative. And you mentioned the Innocence Project, which is Barry Shack. So you got two high-powered people who, the movie Just Mercy got a lot of exposure back then. We talked about Ava DuVernay with When They See Us. So it's at certain points that this becomes more and more apparent, black men are getting shafted. We've got to do something about it. And then it just kind of goes silent.
They look at
so
those
what can media do to move it to the point where we're just not talking about it, but we're doing something about it?
Well, one, I'm doing a talk, I'll give you an example, with Louisiana's black court reporters, and doing a training with them sometime in December or January. And one of the things we talked about is how you actually go deep enough to cover the stories in the way they should. We're in a soundbite culture, so everybody wants it quick. And so there's not enough time to actually investigate. We need old school journalism to come back.
Reporters, yes.
To really go deeper into these. Two, with movies like you mentioned and movements, we have to still do a better job at connecting the data with the narrative. Because again, people look at these as one-offs, or they look at this as, oh, that's a horrible story.
We got to get that
But
system.
they don't see the systemic issue that comes with that. They don't see that story is actually part of something much greater. And that's very hard. Two, three, we have to understand that black men who are the victims in these cases are victims who are created.
Falsified, made up.
That's right, because when you talk about false accusation, you're talking about creating a victim. Not just someone victimizing someone, but you're literally creating a new victim that deserves victims' advocacy like anyone else.
Wow, wow. There's just so much that we could talk about, and as we move towards the conclusion of our program, what are some other things that you would like to see from a legal standpoint be done expeditiously to counter the accusation that black men are inherently evil?
Right. One is that certain immunities that are provided to law enforcement and to court officials and members of the court need to be taken back somewhat. It's almost too much latitude. I think the other thing is that there has to be more investigation now, and I understand that police departments and others feel like they're overwhelmed, but there has to be more investigation before you start to arrest people. Two, three, I think one of the things that we can also do is that in some of these cases, we should consider making it illegal to release mugshots before an actual determination of guilt or innocence is there.
Because once that image is out,
once the image is out, it's out. And so you often talk about don't tamper, you don't want to do things that tamper with juries, right? Or influence juries in certain ways. Well, mugshots do that too, by putting it out there. And then once you find that the person is innocent, or
how do you go and pull all that back?
You don't get to pull all of that back. Even when they're not only exonerated, but even expungement doesn't guarantee it, because you have all of these private companies, as well as even some of the TV stations that don't always adhere to the rules. So this is a problem, but it's a problem that's disproportionately against black men. We've got to do something about it. There should be more people angry about it. Yeah.
I was just saying, there should be more people angry about it. I mean, each individual within their own sphere of influence can do something. I mean, if you see a story on TV that you feel does not accurately portray people of color, black men, contact the news director or do something. But just to say, well, it's too big for you to handle, that's not helping the situation at all.
I think the biggest thing, and I'll say this, is you got to make those who falsely accuse accountable. Yeah. You have to make those who are aware of evidence that contradicts what the person is being accused of, and if they hoard, hide, or change that, they need to be prosecuted. This is the problem. We're not making people pay with their lives like we're making the victims of false accusation pay with their lives.
Well, I hope more people read your article, find out about it, follow up on it. Something I was going to mention, I just lost my train of thought on that one. But any final comments you want to share with our viewers as we move towards the conclusion of our program?
We all can be advocates for something. But we have to have a better understanding of the difference between advocacy and seeking actual justice. And so when justice doesn't align with your advocacy, you still must follow justice first. So what I would say to everyone here, follow justice first.
Follow justice first. And state the name of the article again, and how people can, maybe a website or somewhere they can follow up on some of the other things that you're working on. Right.
So it's called Screaming Without Vocal Cords.
Screaming Without Vocal Cords. Okay.
Black men are victims of false accusation. You'll see that if you put that into your search engine. Okay. Screaming Without Vocal Cords, Black men and false accusation. Like I said, 18 publications across the U.S. have picked that up, and there's a reason. Black with No Chaser, many others have picked it up because the reality is They didn't realize how systemic it was.
Because I mean, I think people would be overwhelmed if they were to the numbers of black men that if you were to ask the question, have you been falsely accused or do you know someone? How many people would raise their hands up, and then once you hear those stories, they would probably be unbelievable. Say no way.
It often is, and what's a shame is that our community realizes that, but we haven't moved aggressively on it. Again, because so many cases, so many times, black men are expendable to the point where they have to be laying face down in the pavement with someone on their neck on camera for you to believe them.
Well, and that's the thought I couldn't remember earlier. You're talking about the George Floyd situation,
Sure.
George Floyd murder. Is that the initial police report? If you Google it and read that initial police report, it was almost like it was just a routine day at the office. You know, it wasn't until the young lady with the video, that video surfaced, that then the mobilization began to occur.
Brave 17-year-old sister, yes.
Yes, yes. Dr. Graham, my illustrious Nubian brother, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to appear on tonight's episode of the Chocolate Box Presents. As you know, you're a veteran here. We like to end each episode by offering our guests an opportunity to participate in a little ritual we call the eating of the chocolate. So,
Sure.
thank you so much again, and I would like to take this opportunity to encourage the viewer to tune in each week, same day, same time, for another fascinating episode of the Chocolate Box Presents, and we'll see you next week. That's why you never know what you're gonna get. Did we cover everything? Did we leave something on the table?